Why do our yoga students resist the use of props, and how can we make them more appealing so that they can get all the benefit of props in their practice? Here's a common scenario. We offer a student a prop to support, engage, align, refine, and they're not really interested. They decline or they don't take them up with much enthusiasm. They seem to think that props send a message that they aren't doing okay in yoga class. And why? Because many of our students view the use of props through a negative lens. So let's talk about why many students don't see props as useful to enhancing their practice and how we might reframe the use of props and put them into a more positive and affirming context. So today we're going to address mindset, we're going to address context, and we're going to explore together some strategies to educate and to encourage our students to make use of props to support and stabilize and engage and enhance their yoga practice. Along the way, I really look forward to hearing your own insights and experience with the use of props as a student or a teacher in training, as a teacher, because it really helps us to learn to hear from many different perspectives. So, firstly, I want to say that props don't have moral value. Props aren't inherently good or bad, they're tools. However, consider that for many people, their only exposure to props is in a negative context. Like, if you can't touch the floor, you can put your hands on a brick. If you can't reach your toes, you might grab a strap. So think about what might these types of prop cues do to our mindset about our practice and the use of props. They might make us believe that there's a right way to do a pose or a way that shows you're an experienced and able yogi. You know what you're doing. You're adept at yoga. Secondly, they might believe that props are there for when you can't, not when you can. And thirdly, it might create a mindset that we want to progress away from props as we develop a practice rather than continue to explore with props um, and how they help us develop. And so I think it's useful at some point to kind of zoom out and look at a macro level of our yoga mindset in general about how we feel, not just about props, but how we feel about our yoga practice and what makes a good or adept yoga practitioner, what makes us feel like we're experienced, like we're getting yoga, like we belong. So we'll flag that. We'll talk about that more. Um, for now, I think um, rather than offering props as though they're only tools for students that can't do the real pose, we can develop strategies to offer props in a way that adds a positive to our practice. When the only context that students have for the use of props is for beginners or people who can't do the real pose, of course, some students might balk at their use. So it's up to us as teachers to reframe the use of props as useful tools to enhance practice rather than tools that indicate weakness or inexperience, both of which are also not bad words, right? So that brings us back to the macro view. Something to keep in mind beyond this discussion is our mindset when it comes to the idea of performing yoga correctly. So I wonder, do any of these mindset issues sound familiar to you? Have you ever thought, oh, I shouldn't need to use a prop here because I'm experienced at yoga. I've been doing yoga for all these years. Because it's definitely familiar for me. I remember being in a class and the teacher approached me in a pose and asked, like, are you okay? You look uncomfortable. Do you want to use a brick for this? And my first reaction was like offended. Like, how dare you? Do you know how long I've been practicing yoga? But then I did check in with my body and actually, yeah, I was uncomfortable in that moment. And yeah, a brick would really be helpful. And it was. And I look back and see that first, that offer, that suggestion by my teacher had to be filtered through my ego before I could just open up and see that, yes, actually, a brick is just what I need today. And that's part of my growth as a yogi. And as teachers ourselves, I think it's useful to first acknowledge that we might have these thoughts and feelings and reactions, and that we might find a way to offer props that people can more easily embrace props, or more than that, they can get interested and excited about what a prop can add to a pose, to make it more comfortable, to bring a pose together. So this might follow me on this train of thought here, but I started to think that maybe the problem inherent in the is the word props. But we don't balk at props being used in like the theater or movies or performing arts. There we know they add to the performance and to the experience. So I looked up how props add to dramatic performances, and it really gave me some great insight into the use of props in yoga. And what it spoke about was that props in acting heightens performance by grounding actors in reality, by revealing traits and communicating emotions without words. They facilitate natural movement, they set the scene, they create a more immersive world. You know, you add a sword and a battle is more dynamic. You add a candle and we have a point of light and focus. You add a sofa and we have a place to hold the action. And we can draw similarities to how we use props in yoga. So our mat creates a space for our practice. It defines an area for movement, as well as cushioning for our joints, you know, some stickiness to hold us in space. And most of our students don't object to the use of a mat, even though this is quite a new addition to yoga practice, you know, just since like the mid 80s or something. But it's become a universal prop, and I wonder if we can make other props as universal. Like blocks. Blocks can help us to ground a pose, they can provide stability, a sense of comfort. If you think about the difference between your hands hanging in space in a standing forward fold or in triangle versus how it feels with pressing your hand into a block, the stability, the strength. If we think about straps, straps help us connect. They give us more reach to catch our feet, to catch our hands, but they also create a loop of energy that can help us contain a pose. Think of the difference between resting your hands on your shins in like a seated forward fold, like Paschimottanasana, versus the connection we feel when we loop a strap around the feet. And then blankets. Blankets bring the ground up to our bodies, they cushion our joints, they bring warmth and comfort. Think about the difference when, you know, you're in a seated position doing breath work. The difference between sitting on the mat, maybe your hips are a bit grippy, you're kind of working to keep your spine tall, versus sitting on a blanket and finding ease in your posture so that you can turn your awareness inward. Or the difference between shavasana with and without a blanket on a cool day. Like a blanket adds so much warmth and comfort to that experience of shavasana. So when it comes to the question of how do we make props more appealing, I think that student enthusiasm begins with teacher enthusiasm. And teacher enthusiasm begins first by exploring your own relationship with props. Like, do you, like I did, carry some negative mindset about props in your own practice? And then maybe educating yourself about how props can be used at all levels of practice and for all sorts of purposes. In Vinyasa Flow, we have less exposure to props, but check out Iyengar classes, restorative yoga, gentle yoga, yin yoga, and you'll get lots of great ideas. And also exploring with props in your own practice. So get to know props intimately, make them a natural part of your flow, and then add those props to your teaching flow as you become really familiar with them. Instead of adding props as an aside, include them in your flow. So like, say you're switching sides of a triangle. Let's, inhale, spiral up, bring your brick with you to set down on the other side. So we can make it an organic part of the practice. So that was a lot of information, but I do want to talk about some tips for adding props to your practice. So I think that having everyone start out with a few props at their mat is really useful and invitational. So that adding a prop doesn't require running around to fetch blocks and straps. So 2 blocks, a strap, and a blanket are good basics to be at everyone's mat. So they're there, they're available. And then tell your students what a prop can add to the pose. Like, you can add some stability here with blocks. You could add some grounding here by folding over your bolster. If you have discomfort here, you can double up the mat underneath your wrists. And then show them what the prop adds. So you might even demo a pose with and without to show them what a prop can do for a pose. So like, when we use a strap to catch the feet, notice how it allows us to keep great length in the spine. When we put blocks under our hands, notice how it can help us to create a long line through the body that we're looking for. When we rest our forehead on a bolster, notice how it allows our neck to fully relax. When we put a folded or rolled blanket under our knees, notice how it can ease out the lower back. So, we want to show our students what props can add to the practice, and also show how props can help us develop technique and even more advanced poses. So, for instance, blocks under your hands to be able to lift your hips off the ground in pickups, or to transition from down dog to sitting and the reverse. Blocks under your hands to lift into upward bow. So props can also be useful to help us really develop and advance our practice. And a way that we can really illustrate that is with class theming. So one way that we can encourage our prop use is to use to workshop a prop, maybe each week, and do something interesting beyond our usual prop use as well. So an important part of any education is to give your students a direct experience, not just talking about props, but also showing how and why to use props and letting them experience and feel. So each week or each month, you could theme a class around a prop and then use it in a variety of ways, in a variety of poses to give students a really rich experience, to how to use a prop to make a pose more accessible, or to ground, or to connect, or to stabilize, or to progress and develop their practice. So let's look at some examples, things that you might explore within your own practice and then maybe add to workshopping. So say I themed a class around the strap. I want to sprinkle the class with opportunities to use the strap, like to catch the feet in forward folds, or to catch the hands in any hands behind the back binding techniques, like in bridge or wide leg forward fold. A really cool way to use a strap is to lay it across the top of your mat, maybe in 2 layers, to put your hands on in poses like down dog. If you find that your hands are slippy, that strap can stop you from slipping and can actually reduce a bit of wrist pain in that pose. Other fun things are to find the line through the body and side angle. You can anchor the strap under your back heel and then hold it in your top arm. And that allows you to align your body to the strap so you can find that nice long line where your hips aren't dipping or staying up out of the line. And similarly in triangle, if you hold the strap between your hands along the back of your neck, This is a really great way for students to learn, if they're poking their chin forward, where to keep their neck, because as you hold that strap, the strap needs to be touching the neck so it can really bring students back into alignment in that pose. So that's a really fun way to workshop both a strap and triangle pose. You can also lay it across the middle of your mat for students who are learning how to hop forward and back. It just gives you that visual reminder that you want to hop up and over, and that can help us to develop that air time that turns a hop into a float. So that's kind of a fun way to use a strap. And then also, for restorative poses, um, we could use a strap to bind something like bound angle or reclining bound angle. That's a really nice way to use a strap. So there's a bunch of ideas that you could use to workshop a whole class with a strap. What about blocks? So we can use our blocks, pressing your hands into blocks in poses like triangles, side angle, wide leg forward fold to ground the hand, to stabilize the pose. We can use blocks under the hands in transitions, like the step through to downward facing dog, from downward facing dog to warrior one, which is a tricky transition for a lot of students. If you have blocks under the hands, it just gives you that extra bit of room to pick up that leg and step it forward. And if you like teaching a strengthening class, you can even add a hold in the lift of that step to work on core strengthening and to develop that step through technique. So that's a fun way to use blocks. You can also use blocks, as I said before, to explore pickups, especially for those of us who are shorter in the arms. We might not be able to get our hips off the ground for pickups and for the transitions like jumping through from down dog to sitting. So blocks under your hands give you that extra bit of space to explore those techniques. Brick under the sacrum or the seat for a more restorative version of bridge, or under the upper back for a more restorative version of fish. And also, honey, under the hands to get lift in upward bow. And that's especially useful for folks with tighter shoulders. So placing the bricks beside the ears to help us lift into upward bow. So there's a bunch of ideas for you to be using blocks or bricks in a workshopped class. Say you theme a class around blankets. So lots of ways you can use a blanket over your lap, or the whole body to add warmth for opening or closing breath work, or in restorative poses like Shavasana, or folded on the belly in Shavasana. That's great for a little bit of weighted diaphragmatic breathing. Folded, of course, under the seat to bring the ground up to the seat, or folded or rolled under the knees if you have knee pain in poses like head to knee pose, Janu Shirshasana, or bound angle, Baddha Konasana. Under bony bits. So just to provide some cushioning. So say in locust pose, sometimes our hip bones really dig into the ground. An opened blanket can be really nice for that. Or underneath the seat in like boat, if your sacrum really digs into the ground. And a blanket use I really like is a rolled blanket, either lengthwise under the spine, for fish pose, for supported fish. And it's really nice. Gives you a sense of like opening the chest from the center outward. Or you can take that rolled blanket and put it horizontally, kind of under the back, under your armpits, so right behind the heart. And that gives us really nice spinal extension over the blanket so we can have some extra time in a supported fish. What else? Or under the shoulders for bridge, so folded between the shoulders and the elbows for bridge pose, or if you're teaching shoulder stands or plows, that's a really good use of that prop. So there's a bunch of ideas for blocks. What about the wall? So if we're using the wall as a prop, first you've got to make sure you have enough wall space. And then, of course, we can be doing legs up the wall. Or you can stand with your back to the wall or the back heel to the wall to align and refine standing poses like triangle, like your warriors. Um, I really like it's really nice to have the back heel on the wall in our warriors. It really gives us something to press into. It can really connect that pose. Or in triangle, having your back to the wall is really cool to explore the alignment and the prioritizing of the front leg, hip, knee, second toe alignment. Our students hear the cue all the time to square the hips to the long edge of the mat, but that alignment shouldn't compromise the alignment of hip, knee, second toe. So when we put our backs to the wall, we can see where our back hip needs to be to maintain that alignment through the front leg. And for most of us, it's actually a little away from the wall. So it's not perfectly square to the long edge of the mat. So it's a really good way to help people understand their unique alignment in something like triangle pose. You can also do hands to the wall for upward bow or hands to bricks to the wall. Those are both really great. And has a few benefits. You know, the wall adds support and stability and grounding. And in poses like upward bow, it can reduce our need for wrist extension, which is great for people who have some issues in the wrist, and for shoulder flexion as well. So the wall's really great for that. And then practicing things like headstands and handstands and forearm stands, of course. Um, and of course, you can just put your hand to the wall to support balancing or your back to the wall to notice your posture. I find this especially useful for poses like extended hand to big toe pose, Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana. Often students aren't aware of when they pick up the knee or they pick up the straight leg and catch the toe, they're not totally aware of how much their posture is moving out of neutral. So if we put our backs against the wall, it can really help us to see where neutral spine is, and so where we need to hold that leg in that standing balance in order to maintain our neutral spine. So that's kind of a fun way to use the wall. And again, in general, the wall adds lots of grounding and support. So a great pose to use for a class that kind of emphasizes that theme. What haven't we talked about yet? Bolsters. So bolsters, obviously amazing for restorative poses like child and yoga mudrasana and shavasana. Also really nice under the hips for a supported bridge if you want to be making that a supported restorative pose, or under the back for fish, and again, either horizontal or lengthwise. Um, I really like the use of the bolster in sun salutations. If we lay a bolster in the middle of the mat lengthwise, so here's our mat and the bolster's lengthwise, it's going to run from the hips to the chest. That's what we're aiming for. It's really great when we lower down into chaturanga. It first of all kind of can help us learn where the halfway place is. And then it gives us some support so we can stay in chaturanga a little longer and work on alignment and technique and make some choices in chaturanga, which is an option we don't often get. Especially, in sun salutations, a lot of those poses, it's one breath, one cue, and then we're moving out. So adding a bolster can give you some time and space, and your students some time and space to really explore the pose and do some learning. And then we flow into upward facing dog, and the bolster is there to support the hips. So again, we have some extra time to spend in the pose so that we can work on alignment and technique, and again, make some choices for our own practice while we've got that support. It reduces some stress on the lower back. And then when you pull back to downward facing dog, the bolster's there to rest your forehead on. And that's a really nice way to hang out in down dog for a few breaths. And so the bolster is not just for restorative poses. It can also be really useful in more dynamic poses as well. And so As you can imagine, some of these props do take a bit of time to teach, so we don't workshop them in every class. But then once we've done that, the students who benefit from the use of that prop, they'll know how to use that prop. They'll have had that direct experience. And so in the future, they can add that to their practice in class or at home. So we're giving them some education. We're giving them some direct experience. We're bringing the enthusiasm for props. And we're giving students a reference point for when they might want to pick up um, and use that prop in their practice, wherever they happen to be. So that was a lot to review. How can we encourage prop use and make props more appealing in our classes? Let's think about a couple of steps. Tell them why, show them how, bring enthusiasm, make sure students have props available to them, and give them a direct experience. Let them feel the props and what they bring to the practice. Lastly, a word about buying props for your classes. Props can be really pricey, especially bolsters. But you can save if you order in bulk. Like there's lots of companies that sell direct to yoga teachers, and you can get a wholesale price depending on how many of each prop you buy. But also the cost of shipping can be quite prohibitive. So it's great if you've got a couple of other yoga teacher friends in your area and you can do a bulk order together. That way, not only do you get a better wholesale price because you're ordering a larger quantity, which brings the price per piece down, you're also sharing the price of shipping, which can be a significant savings. So that is a lot maybe more budget friendly if you can manage to do that. You can also find decent props at places like Aldi and Kmart regularly. You know, the bricks and straps they sell there are absolutely fine. Or you can often find studios or teachers selling their secondhand props. Often you'll find that in Facebook groups for like yoga organizations, Yoga Alliance or Yoga Australia, or in your local yoga teacher Facebook group. So it's worth joining those groups, not just for community, but to perhaps get a really good deal on some secondhand props, which can really help you build your prop library. All right, that was a lot. I'll leave you with that for now. I hope that you've got some ideas and perhaps some strategies and enthusiasm to add your own props and prop techniques into your classes and make props more appealing and interesting and accessible to your students. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you soon.